If we could begin the session, please. If people could take their seats. Thank you very much. So I have the pleasure of introducing the final session of the conference, and what we've got here is a session which is entitled Transformations. The idea with this session was to think about the ways in which sociology has the potential for making a real impact in society. We've got our theory, we've got our methods, and increasingly the funders are asking us to demonstrate pathways to impact. And so that's the kind of thing which we are increasingly required to do, and actually it's quite exciting to have to do it as well. In the old days, I think we were sort of reluctant to write these impact statements. Increasingly now we see the value of them. So we've got two speakers for you tonight, and we're going to do a presentation and then questions for each speaker in turn. There's a slight time squeeze, I've been told, because I thought that we were here to talk with the presentations till 8, but it seems that the closing ceremony is also included in that, so that the whole session, including the closing ceremony, ends at 8. But there will be questions at the end of each presentation. I've asked the presenters to, if they can, speed up a little bit as they talk. But let me first of all introduce to you Jana Hainsworth, expert in EU social policy and children's rights, has over 25 years experience working at EU level, influencing policy and helping organisations to communicate and implement those policies at a national level. From 2006 to 2022, she was Secretary General of Eurochild. This is when I first got to know Jana, working on various projects to do with child well-being. Eurochild's a network of organisations promoting the rights and well-being of children across Europe. She's helped design advocacy campaigns on early childhood development and deinstitutionalisation. During her leadership, Eurochild influenced several EU milestones, notably the EU strategy on the rights of the child and the European Child Guarantee. Jana, it's a pleasure to have you here.
Thank you very much, Gary, for the warm welcome and for the invitation from ESA to be with you this evening. It's a great honour. I hope that I will do it full justice. Hopefully this now will transform onto your screen. Is that right? Am I doing anything? Yay, okay. Maybe if I click this, it goes to full screen. Yeah, okay. So yeah, very happy to be with you this evening, and warm congratulations to Poland and to Warsaw for your upcoming event 2026. I do hope that you'll also be celebrating Janusz Korczak, child rights advocate, educator, pedagogue, maybe not a sociologist, but really important Polish figurehead for all of us working on children's issues. But I'm going to start my presentation this evening just taking us back a couple of, back to 2019, back 5 years ago. So as Gary said, at that time I was working as Secretary General of Eurochild, European umbrella of children's rights organisations. And this event, for those of you familiar with UNCRC, is celebrating the International Children's Day on the 20th of November. And this is somewhere I'm very familiar with. It's Brussels hemisphere, where all of the MEPs meet, make decisions, decide. And we were welcomed by the chair of the Civil Liberties Committee of the European Parliament, together with many civil society organisations and children. So I'd like to introduce you to Shidi. Shidi is an Irish child rights advocate, a member of Eurochild's Children's Council, 12 members from all different countries. She's 14 years old, and she sits in front of the plenary of the European Parliament, quite nervous, probably like I'm feeling right now, and just to have a little excerpt of her speech prepared together with children in the Children's Council, and also reflecting on a Europe-wide survey carried out with children. 20,000 children responded to a survey on the Europe kids want. So she said, many of our prime ministers have come into this room to share their vision of the future of Europe. But no one is more affected by that future than the children of today. Children are 20% of the present, we are 100% of the future. Yes, children are suffering, but we are also great agents of change. We want our political leaders to take our views seriously, and children's interests should be at the very heart of the continent that considers itself to be a global leader. So this is what I'm going to be talking about today. I was asked 18 months ago, and the title I gave was Science, Politics and Activism, just to manage expectations a little bit. So my experience comes from working at an EU level on behalf of civil society networks. So I spent 16 years as Secretary General of Eurochild. I was also twice elected as President of Social Platform, which brings together over 40 European networks advocating on social justice and participatory democracy. And I also helped establish a EU alliance on investing in children that still exists today and brings together around 20 networks advocating for investing in children and tackling child poverty. So my activism is very much in the corridors of power of the European Union. It's not protesting on the streets, and so there are many, many forms, and I've listened with great interest to some of the conversations over the last 3 days. So my activism with those members, organisations, with experts at Brussels level is in the corridors of power in the European Parliament, in the European Commission, and the Council of the European Union. So I'm going to be talking today more about how influencing the European Union is so crucial to deliver change and social impact. I'm also going to be reflecting a little bit, as you all know, there were Parliament elections this June, reflecting a little bit on the current situation and the challenges and threats that may be ahead. So I'm talking about the European Union, not Europe. You might tell from my accent I am British, but I've lived and worked in Brussels for 27 years. I also have Belgian citizenship. I'm very much committed to the European Union being a success story. The European Union is constantly evolving political experiment, and I think we need to keep that in mind. It is not static. It means many different things to many different people. Our role is to shape it in a way that is respectful of human rights, human dignity, children's rights, child well-being. One thing I wanted to situate us as well in the European continent, 27 EU member states. 5 years ago, there wasn't much appetite for enlargement. That all changed now with the full-scale invasion of Russia, 2022, and the pace of change is now significantly accelerated. So in the political guidelines of Ursula von der Leyen in July, she promises to appoint a commissioner for enlargement. So we have the 5 Balkan states in the waiting room, plus Moldova, Ukraine, Georgia stepped back a little bit recently with the recent legislative changes. Turkey is still a candidate country, but I have to say I'm afraid that their accession is very much stalled. Why do I raise this? Because for those of you working on sociological research in those accession countries, that whole process of accession is a really important opportunity to influence. And that's one of the areas that we were working on in Eurochild, is really helping those countries during that accession period to reform. Those of you in the room who maybe saw the child protection reforms in Bulgaria and Romania as an example during the 1990s, early noughties, would testify to the importance of accession as a critical window of opportunity of influence. The other thing that will come with that expansion, when that happens from 27 to potentially 35 EU member states, is that Ursula von der Leyen has said that she favours a redraft or a reform of the treaties. So a very, very critical opportunity, but also challenge. The last time that the EU treaties were changed, were adopted in came into force on the 1st of December 2009, and prior to that, for many years, as you might imagine, many interest groups lobbying in the corridors of power to influence that text. And what we got in 2009 was a commitment in Article 3 to promote that the European Union has as one of its core objectives to promote and protect the rights of the child. It also gave the Charter of Fundamental Rights the same legal status as the Lisbon Treaty, and that very much reflects the UN Convention on the Rights of the Child. So that legal basis, the EU is still in the global sphere a key sort of supporter for the international rule of law up until this point, and that's a really important window that needs to be influenced. To keep in mind also if there is moves towards treaty reform. I'm going to move now to the key policy areas. Gary already mentioned it in the introduction. So the last 5-year legislative cycle under the leadership of Ursula von der Leyen, and as they opened, started in 2019, and we had that real commitment to an EU strategy on the rights of the child. A lot of lobbying went in advance of that, but this is one of the key policy achievements, key policy milestones that was adopted as part of the EU strategy on the rights of the child in March 2021. The European Child Guarantee. So this is a EU political response to the societal challenge of child poverty in the EU. So those of you working in this field will be aware that 1 in 4 children growing up in the EU is at risk of poverty and social exclusion. That ranges from 39% in Romania to 10% in Slovenia, and represents around 20 million children. So the EU made a political commitment to lift 5 million children out of poverty by 2030 as part of its action plan to implement the European Pillar of Social Rights. It requires all EU member states to guarantee children access to basic services, and those 5 key policy areas are education, early childhood education and care, health, housing, and nutrition. And it focuses on particular groups of children in need, those obviously at risk of poverty and social exclusion, in particular Roma, children with a migrant background, and that includes undocumented, children with disabilities, and children in the care system. All EU member states are required to adopt national action plans to demonstrate how they are going to implement the child guarantee, on which they have to report biannually. And all EU member states have designated a national coordinator responsible for oversight of the implementation of the national action plans. The European Commission facilitates a lot of dialogue between the national coordinators and very actively seeks input from civil society on the ground and experts. It is also finalising a monitoring framework with indicators to measure progress across the EU. There are also very significant financial resources to support implementation. Cohesion policy, which accounts for around about 1/3 of the EU budget. Some of that money is going towards primary health care, early childhood education and care, social housing. It's a real shift from 10 years ago when you'd think about EU money in cohesion going towards road building or supporting employment and training integration. And what's important is that those countries who have higher than average child poverty rates are required to spend at least 5% of their European Social Fund to tackle child poverty. So quickly to give an example, I don't know if there are any Bulgarian sociologists in the room, because I haven't met any in my 3 days of working, so maybe if I could. There are some, yeah, good. So Bulgaria has a particular place in my heart. And it's an area I'm working with an organisation called Tanya's Dream Fund, who is a private philanthropy initiative. It's putting money to help leverage, to make sure that the money that the Bulgarian government has on paper at least allocated to implement the European Child Guarantee goes to where it's most needed. So that's a country where 34% of children growing up in poverty, As you may know, that varies widely between ethnic groups, with around 70% of children of Roma ethnic background experiencing poverty and social exclusion. So, this is, for us, and I think for those working on the issue of child poverty, child well-being, to really collaborate with civil society organisations in your countries to be able to really monitor, make sure that commitment and that money goes to where it needs to, and to make a real difference to the lives of children and families. So I come now to the wider EU strategy on the rights of the child, another area that's particularly close to my heart, and that is the thematic area 1, and that is to really enable children's participation in political and democratic life. Shortly after I started in Eurochild, in 2006, we organised our first ever Brussels meeting with children. Children came from 7 countries and were discussing their views and experience of poverty. And I have to say, in 2006, 2007, it was very, very difficult to get anybody working in the EU institutions to take the views of children seriously. But we've kept on every year, and with support from the expertise within the members, within research community, bringing children to meet with EU policymakers, both parliamentarians and people working in the Commission. And gradually we got to that recognition of children having a real valuable contribution to make. And just to illustrate a little bit the journey that we went on, in 2007, taking you back to the European Parliament hemisphere, and we were supported by then Roberta Angelini. She was a MEP from Berlusconi's party, and she was nominally supportive of an EU strategy on the rights of the child, something we were advocating for strongly back then. But you imagine our surprise as we walked in to the hemisphere, and there on the podium, decorated with pink and blue knitted booties. Now, that mindset, seeing children as objects of care, only as objects of care, is still very much alive and well in political circles in Brussels today. But thankfully, policy making has significantly moved on, and I would say that the European Commission would never think at this point in time to organise any high-level event concerning children and children's rights without involving children early on, designing the agenda, providing expert input, and influencing the outcomes. So we have made significant progress. And just to illustrate 2 examples of what's happening right now, we have EU Children's Participation Platform. It's a 4-year EU-funded initiative aimed at reaching out to children across Europe to enable them to participate in policy development. They were consulted on the recent recommendation on integrated child protection systems. And I also wanted to give a little bit of a plug to a project that Eurochild was involved in, together with the University of Central Lancaster and the University of Barcelona. Kath, I think you're in the room somewhere, maybe you can wave your hand. Down there, yes. So Kath Larkins, Professor Kath Larkins, University of Central Lancaster. Very important person to speak to if you're interested in this work. She's also a very active member of Eurochild, so can tell you all about the benefits and what's involved. So that was a project that consulted with 370 children, more or less, in Spain, Bulgaria, Portugal, Croatia and Belgium. Really, and the whole project is called Reaching In, because it's about reaching in with the framework of the European Child Guarantee, saying that we've got this at EU level. How can we communicate and engage with grassroots, with children and young people themselves, helping them understand what this opportunity is, and then channeling back their views and what they think is important to them back up into the policymaker arena. And I have to say, the results of that project were actually circulated among the national coordinators of the European Child Guarantee, and got some feedback on how valuable it is to get that message from the grassroots. Am I still doing okay for time? Good.
Yeah, 7 minutes.
think I'm going to be done. Right, I'm going to change tone. We are August 2024, European Parliament elections, beginning of June. I've talked about different opportunities to engage in EU policy making, but we have another 5 years legislative cycle ahead of us. So far, Ursula von der Leyen's political guidelines that she introduced in July keep a fairly progressive agenda. She's talking about a EU Commissioner for Future Generations. She's also talking about a commissioner with specific responsibility on access to housing. So a number of the areas where we as civil society organisations working on issues of social justice and human rights can see hooks, can see areas that we can work with the next 5 years of the legislative cycle of the European Commission. But, and there is a big, big but, you might be aware that the fear of the far right was significant before the European Parliament elections. They perhaps didn't get the tidal wave that some feared, but they're a very, very powerful force now in the European Parliament. They're a powerful force because some of their narrative gets co-opted by some of the mainstream parties, but also the fact that they are in the European Parliament, they get funding, they get money for ideas creation, they get money for communication. And as they talked about those pink and blue booties, there'll be many in the European Parliament that are wanting a reversal of children and children's rights and redefining children's rights to this. And you've heard about it. I know that there's many people working on this issue of anti-gender movements in the room, and Alia talked about it in the opening plenary. This is an image taken from a presentation by Neil Datta from the European Parliamentary Forum on Reproductive and Sexual Rights. Some of you will be familiar with his work. But there's a real kind of fear-mongering around protecting family life, protecting a family being a father, a mother, and children. And this really plays out into the child rights movement. And members of Eurochild, particularly those in Central and Eastern Europe and Bulgaria, have had a lot of social media campaigns and hatred against them. It's been really very difficult for them the last 5 years. And that now is present in the Brussels bubble. So I'd say Giorgia Meloni's government in Italy holds very conservative views on parenthood and childhood. And Viktor Orban's government in Hungary has, I think with some success, really tried to position itself as a model for other countries to follow. And as you see, Patriots for Europe, the parliament group that Fidesz set up, is now the third largest political group in the European Parliament. It has 84 MEPs from 12 member states. It is led by Jordan Bardella, protege of Marine Le Pen, and Kinga Gál from Fidesz is vice president. So 5 minutes, Jana. Now 5 minutes, yeah. So these people, who, because they have a very anti-EU rhetoric, very anti-establishment, they've been there's this cordon sanitaire, some of you will be familiar with that. They are not allowed to take on positions of decision-making power. So we think kind of next 5 years we might still be able to really be involved in pushing a more progressive agenda, but this is the time that they also get to mobilize and they also get to communicate. So my last slide is really about those key messages I'd like you to go away with. The first is really don't be shy of engaging with policymakers and working with civil society in alliance to get your research evidence out there. And your work is political. So it's really, you cannot shy away. A lot of the work that I've been listening to over the last 3 days, it needs to be communicated outside the academic circle so that you are influencing and supporting all the other actors, practitioners, civil society, media, progressive politicians, get that information out there so that they can work together with you to influence others and influence the political agenda. Obviously for us in the children's rights sector, amplifying the voices of children and young people. I've heard lots of good practices of engaging with participatory-led approaches with children and young people. There are many different fora now which for those children to engage in more political democratic life. We have the Eurochild Children's Council, but all children's rights civil society organisations who are worth their salt will have some form of advisory board. And some of you might think it's more tokenistic, but it's actually what I've experienced with those children who stayed with the Eurochild Children's Council over 2 years. It was such a phenomenal growth for each of those individuals. And then for us working in that secretariat to have that sounding board and engagement with children. So just think about it as opportunities for them. There are lots of calls for these kinds of advisory boards, Council of Europe, EU, civil society, etc. I really don't need to say this in the forum of a conference that's built around enabling research, international research networks, but cross-border international work is so crucial at a time when some malign forces are trying to convince us that we're better off in our national borders. That's absolutely not the case, and research can shine that light on what are the commonalities of your challenges and what is working. And last but not least, I probably can't see it on the slide, but it's that whole use of media, and we're obviously seeing this incredible outsized influence of social media. Many far-right are using it to very, very effectively. It's an interesting workshop on Wednesday, mapping transnational discourse coalitions for the anti-gender movement. Well, can we also look at what will mobilize transnational discourse coalitions for our areas of interest? We cannot speak amongst ourselves. We really need to get those messages out. And I also refer to Analia's opening speech around sexuality education, so much evidence about how it's important and what the benefits are of good quality sexual education for children and adolescents. And yet, far-right are really exploiting people's fears around that to, which makes no sense, because it's really not in the interests of children and young people. That's it. I'm going to finish here just with a great thank you.
Thanks very much, Jana, for that talk and that insight into the EU and that non-academic world, which I think many people, maybe most of us, or even all of us, would like to engage with even more. We've got time for questions, so if people would like to raise their hand, I can see one coming up already, so if the mic could come to the front, please.
Thank you so much, Jana. My name is Cristina Santos. I'm a scholar based at the Center for Social Studies in Portugal. I've been working on LGBTQI+ issues for over 25 years. And I appreciated your message and especially your concerns. And I'm wondering, in a time in which children are weaponized hugely, with all of that all those years few hate speech against trans people. I'm wondering, it's a million-dollar question that has been asked by who defends the child, who defends the gender and so I would like to hear you on this. How can we, as engaged public sociologists, responsible scholars, do to serve the purposes of defending the rights of especially vulnerable children, such as gender-diverse children, or
of children and how we need so much training and professional awareness raising and it's children to weaponize it. I mean, these individual children are going, we also know so much more, and there's evidence around LGBTQI children, much suicide, depression. We have this big focus on mental health in the last legislative cycle of the EU, and those are the cohorts of children that are suffering the most, and bullying, and so it just doesn't. I mean, I come from just a space where you need to respect the personal integrity of every human being, and children are navigating who they are, their identity, their sexuality, their gender. And there's so much expertise out there. So I really rises me when the gender because I just think we could realize when you're talking about going through complex evolutions in their own, really important to train professionals to support that. And as a support families, I think a lot of parents are not really equipped to accompany their children through those very deep questions.